This is Game On, discussing the biggest games and all the latest sports news with Johnny Montalbano and Hank Indictor on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Showtime, folks. It's episode 58 of Game On here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. I'm Johnny Montalbano. That's Hank Indictor. Hank, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well, and oh my gosh, you have no idea how much I was longing to hear that intro again.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks. I want to first thank Paul Lombardi for filling in for me the last 2 weeks. Of course, you know, it's been 2023 and things have just been coming up, but I'm doing great. Hank, you and Paul together, I have to say, I went back and listened to both shows while I was away, and it was fantastic. So in case that ever does happen again, and full disclosure, I think there's a possibility it will, because it's just been that kind of year. Hopefully not for a little while at least, but we'll look forward to that. But yeah, Hank, absolutely. It's good to be back. And I come back and, you know, nothing's changed. Good amount of sports stuff as always to discuss here, as we are now in the middle of June. It's crazy to say that. You know, we're already getting through summer. Before you know it, not trying to rush the summer away, but before you know it, we'll be back with football stuff. We actually do have a little bit of football to get to in the show today. But yeah, a lot to get to. But it's good to see you, Hank. Good to be back aboard. But we come back here at episode 58 already of Game On with a lot to discuss. And, of course, folks, we want to hear from you. So several ways for you to get aboard. Of course, first and foremost, you can follow us across all of our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter at Game On ETB, on Instagram at Game On_ETB. Our personal handles right there and there. And, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ETB Network, where if you like today's episode, leave us a like. If you're new, hit that subscribe button as we inch closer to 400 and beyond. And, of course, have your notifications set so you know when all of our programming is going to be coming out. I know these last couple of weeks have been just absolutely crazy that we've been, you know, changing the premiere days of our show and everything else. But you know what? That's the summer now. You know, it happens, but nevertheless, we are here. And, of course, you can check out our website at etbpodcast.com. Great stuff from Hank, from Jen, and all that stuff. And I heard that there's actually going to be a game show blog that's going to be coming up, which is right up my alley, because I was telling Hank, before we started here today, that really the biggest story that's going on right now is not sports. It's the fact that Pat Sajak is going to be calling it a career at Wheel of Fortune after next season, which is a very big deal. But we will get to the blog on that, and we'll have some thoughts on there.
Yeah, this is a blog that if you guys didn't know, I am probably just as much of a fan of game shows. I wouldn't put my love for game shows ahead of sports, but I've been watching them for as far back as I can remember, and I think it'll be kind of cool to branch out a little bit from what I usually read about in this blog department. And Johnny, you are certainly more than welcome to contribute with a quote or two if you want to, because I know you're just as much, if not a bigger game show fan than I am.
Absolutely, Hank, I will do. And just for the record, game shows are a sport. They're the fifth major sport behind, you know, the four majors that we obviously talk about. But we are actually going to get into more than just the four majors. Yeah. But we're going to get into actually more than just the four major sports on this show here today, because we've actually got some tennis talk. We've got some golf talk. We've got a little bit of horse racing news even to get to. So we've got a lot to get to. So let's get right into it, Hank. And we'll tip things off here by putting a capper on the 2022-2023 NBA season. And it happened on Monday night. The Denver Nuggets defeated the Miami Heat on Monday night in 5 and won the first NBA title in their franchise's history. And Hank, when I look at this, and this was a series that going into it, I thought that this was going to be a series that either the Nuggets were going to win in a short series or the Heat were going to win in a long one. And you were wondering going into this. See, what I thought going into this series was, we know Jokic was the best player of the two teams going into the series. But when I look at the finals, I look, where's your secondary scoring or your secondary player going to come from? And to me, the Nuggets had Jamal Murray. The Miami Heat, outside of Jimmy Butler, who was going to be that second player to step up? Now, Bam had a pretty good series, but other than that, they weren't really getting as much production from their other players like they did in the series before against the Celtics, against my Knicks. But starting from the Denver side of things, Hank, I mean, I don't know what else you could say between, their first title, between Jokic, and right now he's basically becoming on track to become an all-time great in the NBA with what he's done. But there's so many great things to talk about from Denver's side. So let's start there. What do you take from this, from their first NBA title?
Well, I think first and foremost, I just have to say, when I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong. And Johnny, I don't know about you, but I was very much on the record for saying I thought that Denver was somewhat overhyped, and I didn't think they had enough star power to get them through the playoffs. Turned out, not only was I wrong, but Novak, sorry, I'm getting my Serbians mixed up, but Nikola Jokic must have listened to what I said, and he probably was looking at it and he was like, "Fuck you, Hank. I'm gonna carry the Nuggets all the way to a title." And guess what? He beat a Phoenix Suns team that had Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. He swept the Lakers, and you and I both were dead wrong on that series. Why on earth did I think the Lakers would win? But hey, on the bright side, thank God I got that wrong, because I mean, it sure as hell beats seeing that LeBron James guy. Yeah, I've heard of him winning another title. And once they beat the Lakers, I'm like, you know what? I'll stop doubting them. They're going to win this finals, because as much as you love the story of the Miami Heat, and they had a great run, don't get me wrong, and even though I'm a Knicks fan, you have to tip your cap to them. At the end of the day, regardless of how well Jimmy Butler performed, and we're going to roast him probably as we talk more about this finals, the Heat just did not have the talent to compete with the Denver Nuggets. And getting back to Jokic, what more can I say? This was a legendary and historic performance. It seemed like every single day during this playoffs, he was getting a triple-double. And Johnny, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he got 10 of them during this year's playoffs alone.
Yeah.
Well, I have never seen a dominant performance like that. And keep in mind, I remember very well great performances from LeBron James, Shaq. I remember when Kobe Bryant had fantastic performances. Even Giannis was solid a few years ago. But nothing to the extent of what Jokic did. And Jamal Murray obviously was that great little Robin to his Batman, if you want to get into my little superhero analogies right there. And at the end of the day, you had them, and while you might not look at the rest of the roster and think, oh, this screams like championship contender, the top two guys are good enough to where it doesn't really seem like that's much of a factor. Because I think I've said this before, I'm not really a big fan of Michael Porter Jr.'s game. And like, if you ask Nick, he'll tell you, he and I were like literally screaming, "Stop shooting the ball so much," during certain moments of Game 5. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the better team won this finals. And I would say Jokic, Murray, and all the rest of those Denver Nuggets are never going to have to pay for another meal in the city of Denver.
Yeah. Like I said, Jokic wasn't the thing I was worried about with Denver. It was going to be their complementary players. And Jamal Murray has stepped up. It reminded me of the Jamal Murray of the bubble run in 2020, where actually when you look at him, he could be a number one on a bunch of other teams, but staying there in Denver, being the complementary guy to Jokic was a great thing. It reminds me of championship runs past, like what we saw with Wade, like Dwayne Wade was to LeBron, like Kobe was to Shaq before it was the other way around, or even you could say even Pippen to Jordan. And in a time where we've gone back and looked at, so-called big threes, you don't really need the big three anymore. You need a big two. And that's the thing that I think Miami, while they had an unbelievable run, they had Jimmy Butler, who did not have a great series, to be fair. I mean, when you look at it, but they had Butler and they were getting nice contributions from other players. But if you don't have that secondary player, it's hard to win a title. And it's very rare when you look at championship teams that they don't have a second player. Even, when the Bucks won, we know about Giannis, but they had, Middleton. Denver had Jokic, who, like I said, he is on track to become an all-time great if he keeps this going. I'm not going to put him just yet because there's one characteristic of, in my opinion, Hank, of an all-time great, and that's longevity.
Longevity.
And again, he's doing it right now, but when you look at the guys like, you're trying to compare him to like Shaq, which those two players are totally different, but you're trying to compare it to Shaq and those kind of big players. He's not there yet because he's got to keep doing this. Now, again, this is a historic run for what Denver's had to do here. And sometimes when you win a championship, you need to take a favorable run. And you had brought that up just a few minutes ago. Denver beat 2 number 8 seeds in Minnesota and Miami, a 7 seed in the Lakers, and a 4 seed in the Phoenix. But looking at their run here throughout this postseason, Hank, I mean, it was a dominant run. They never trailed in any series. They went 16-4 in the postseason, and they won 10 of their last 11 games. And you almost could have made the case that they could have swept the Heat in this series with how they were playing.
They honestly should have, if you look at the way that game ended.
Yeah, so we are talking about one of the most dominant runs in NBA history to win this championship. And it's great for the franchise, obviously winning their first time. They were one of only 11 active franchises to never win a championship. So now they could check that off the list. And, Michael Malone, what he's had to do has been great. And again, Jokic, I mean, not enough great things can be said about him. Here's a guy that, was the 41st pick in the NBA draft, and he's going to go down as the best number 41 pick overall in the NBA draft history.
Unreal.
Right? And so that's it from the Denver side. Now let's talk about Miami, because let's not discount what this team did. I mean, as an 8th seed, winning the play-in tournament to get into the playoffs, disposing of the top seed in the East in the Bucks, getting past my Knicks, getting past the Celtics when a lot of people did not give them really a chance against Boston. And I was one of those. I thought they could have given them a series, but I thought star power at the end of the day was going to do it. Now, their star power, Jimmy Butler, was playing like a star. They were getting great contributions from other guys too, like Strauss, like Robinson, all those kind of guys. But the problem was you get to the finals and those guys started to, no pun intended, burn out. The heat started to cool off, literally. I mean, this is not really a pun intended, but
now that you mention it, I feel like that Celtic series may have took a lot out of the Heat. The more I think
possible.
About it.
I mean, these are guys. A lot of these guys, remember, like Duncan Robinson and a few of their other guys were undrafted guys, so they were not really. And this is not familiar territory for them. And Butler's Jimmy Butler was great. He was putting almost a historical reference in his own terms, but he takes on this Nuggets team, and part of the thing is too, Miami had to resort a lot to outside shots, and sometimes in the NBA, folks, we could do all this talking. It's very simple. If you don't make your three pointers in this NBA, especially in today's NBA, you're not going to win. And Miami just was not making their 3-pointers in this series.
And in contrast, if Miami misses, if Denver was that type of team where if they're down by like 15, 14, they can make it like a 3-point deficit in a heartbeat.
And that speaks again to Jokic, a guy who can go down low, can dish the ball out, can shoot the 3 ball. I mean, have you ever seen a guy that tall with such range? Very rare.
Oh my gosh. He's a unicorn. He's a friggin' unicorn. Like, it's incredible. 7'4", can shoot, or 7'3", shoot 3-pointers. And it's funny. Nick and I were talking about this beforehand. I don't know if I discussed this with you, Johnny, but I want to ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a stretch to say that when it's all said and done, we could put him ahead of Shaq for all-time greats?
Well, Hank, right now I'm going to say no, because he has to continue to do this. I mean, he's on track to, but
Yeah.
longevity is a big thing. I mean, let me not go to this extreme, but I will. If he in 2 years suffers a very significant injury and is never the same player again, I can't put him ahead of Shaq. But they're both
That's
two
totally
different.
fair.
But they're two totally kind of different big men though too, because his range is much, more than Shaq. So he's more versatile. He's a better passer, assist guy than Shaq, and a better free throw guy than Shaq. Like, if you're ever going to go to the free throw line, Shaq was the pure definition of an intentional foul. You don't talk about the intentional walk in baseball. You talk about the intentional foul in basketball. That's what you're doing with Shaq. But Jokic can make the free throws. So
actually, Johnny, we had a term for that. Hack-a-Shaq.
Hack-a-Shaq, yes. So to answer your question, if he obviously continues this run, and he would have to do this for at least the next decade plus, then it certainly is a possibility, yes. But right now, if we're talking careers right now, then no. It's like trying to talk to somebody about the Hall of Fame. One of the characteristics to me about the Hall of Fame is your longevity. Unless you put up the most unbelievable 8-year run that we've ever seen, and even that's still not enough to me. I mean, to me, the before you talk about all-time greats, you're talking at least 10 plus years for me before I consider you an all-time great. So if he can continue to do this for 10 plus years, then absolutely. But right now, I cannot say that he's above Shaq, but he is on the pace to be above Shaq. Yes.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you whatsoever. And this again was another conversation that Nick and I were having. You may recall we said something about this during the watch party for game 2. Well, okay, streaming, but I pretty much call it a watch party because
it was a watch party, which unfortunately I was bummed I could not attend, but obviously you know why that is.
I'm sure I'm sure there will be plenty of opportunities for you to attend another one of those watch parties. But
hopefully, but go ahead.
That being said, Paul pretty much said the same thing too, by the way. So I want to give him a little shout out too, by the way. He was a lot of fun getting back and doing shows with him for the first time since, God knows how long back, when he and I were with that which we shall remain nameless, but you know what I mean?
And his show, the 3&D, has been off to a stellar start here on the Empty the Bench podcast network. So that's what I would talk about with Jokic. But I mean, it's certainly, he's on track to do this. But you never know in the NBA because or in sports in general, because you always have to consider that one injury that could change your entire career around. I mean, we're not rooting for that, but you have to keep that in the very, very back part of your mind. But, we want to talk about a couple of other things with the Nuggets here. How about we talk about Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Nuggets? I mean, what a remarkable run.
It's actually Kroenke.
Is it Kroenke? I said Kroenke. I feel cranky saying that. It's Kroenke, yes. I mean, maybe I'm cranky because I'm jealous about what he's done now in the last 3 seasons, Hank. He's got an NFL, an NHL, and an NBA championship. I mean, he
even has a lacrosse championship with I don't know what they're called, Colorado Hitmen.
Yes, the Colorado lacrosse team. You're right, but he's got a Super Bowl championship with the Los Angeles Rams following the 2021 season when they beat the Bengals. He's got a Stanley Cup title with the Colorado Avalanche when they hoisted it last summer after defeating the Lightning, and now obviously the Nuggets with their first championship. That's quite a ride. Not only to win in 3 straight years. The Colorado Mammoths, by the way, is the lacrosse team. But
Mammoths, yeah. I was thinking Hitmen because I know that's like a typical lacrosse team name.
It's hard to put this into words because it's hard to win one championship, and not only is he winning a championship in back-to-back years, but in different sports.
Yeah.
So quite an amazing feat there. And a couple of other nuggets I want to take, pun intended, from the Denver side. Some of the other players you have to talk about. Obviously, we've been talking about Jokic and Murray a lot. And, Murray missed the entire 2021-22 season with a torn ACL, and now he's an NBA champion after the great run that he had in the 2020 bubble. Now he's back and he's won a championship. But some of the other players on the I'd say, I almost want to use a New York Rangers reference here. black aces. That's the phrase that we were using in the '94 championship team.
Yes,
Jeff Green,
you're talking about the guys you didn't really play.
right? Like the Eddie Olczyks of the world, the Joey Kosers, and all that stuff. Wow, it's amazing how I think about that. Well, you know what it is? We're premiering this episode on the near 30-year anniversary of that '94 championship team there. But on the Nuggets here, some of these dark horse players, Jeff Green, 12 on his 12th team in 16 years. DeAndre Jordan on his 7th team in 15 years. Maybe my favorite story of them all, Ish Smith on his 13th team in 13 seasons. I mean, amazing. And Christian Braun winning 3 straight high school titles, an NCAA championship, and an NBA championship in his young career.
And he did something that very few NBA players have done, and included in that company are names such as Bill Russell and Magic Johnson.
Yeah, you had brought that up during the watch party back in Game 2.
Henry Bibby was another guy who did this too. He was with UCLA, and he was also on the 73 Knicks. And the only other name I can think of off the top of my head, I would say Billy Thompson, who actually three-peated because he was on the 86 Louisville team, and then he won back-to-back with the Lakers.
Wow. Yeah, it's you don't see it that much because, I mean, if you're a star player on a college championship team, you're probably going to get drafted high, and that would usually be to a team that wasn't doing pretty well. But an amazing ride. So, Hank, now sometimes the question that gets asked way too early, right after a championship team, is, can they run it back and do it again next season? And I'll tell you what, there's a couple of things that I look at the Denver Nuggets here, and the reason why I think they've got a very favorable shot to do this again, I have 2 reasons. Number one, the Western Conference, because it is not that strong. I mean, we're talking about, when you look at the West, you've got the Suns, probably, I'd say, still very, very good. Now, they're going to be interesting because they've got a new coach there. They got to decide, Chris Paul now is no longer there unless they decide to bring him back. I know he got waived this past week, and maybe they bring him back on a lesser deal, but I don't know there. I mean, you still got Durant and Booker, so you still got to take Phoenix in that list. I think the Lakers are still going to be a playoff caliber team, but, LeBron's another year older. But you look at that West, and the other team, too, that I think is going to be a very mysterious team, and I don't know how good they're going to be next year because of the whole Ja Morant situation, is Memphis. And that is going to be a big deal coming up, and that's something that Adam Silver had brought up when the finals had started, that they were not going to make a decision until after the finals regarding Ja Morant. Now, if he ends up having a very significant suspension, how does that affect the Grizzlies in terms of their run? So I think they have a very favorable path out West, number one, which is unlike years past when it used to be the West was the stronger conference and the East was the weaker. Now the roles have reversed. And number two, you look at their starting 5, and they have 5 starters that are all 30 and under. Mm-hmm. They've got a superstar, obviously, in Jokic. They've got an elite second option there in Murray, and a slew of really good players who could have bigger roles elsewhere, but they decided to stay and be part of something meaningful. That's how you get it done. Consistency, 2 stars, because I'll put Murray as a star, and young players that have great roles. That's part of it. And Michael Malone's is a great coach, so all the pieces are there for Denver to run this back again.
Would not surprise me in the least bit. And also, I don't know if Golden State's going to be back either, and I don't think the Lakers are going to be as good. So it's definitely, it's not out of the question.
Yeah, I would look at Golden State, and the one question I would have with them is what is going to happen with Draymond Green. I think he's got a $22 million player option for next season, but I don't know, because that team's only getting older. Curry's been having some injuries the last couple of years. Klay Thompson's been great, but, I mean, how long is that run going to be out there in Golden State? I don't know, but that would be another team that's still going to contend. I just don't know they're going to be as dominant as they've been in years past. But Draymond's, by the way, is 27.6. I think that's a player option. I think he's going to opt into that unless he's going to want a multi-year deal. But I don't think he's going to get $27+ million from any other team. I'd be shocked if that's the case. But that's why I think when you look at Denver, I think they could definitely run this back for sure. If they're healthy, this is the same group of players. That's how you get repeat champions, as rare as it's been in sports overall the last several years.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, on the Miami side, I think Miami's got to go get a star. Now, who that star is going to be, that I don't know. I mean, I don't think, and we were talking about this before we started the show today. I don't think it's going to be Damian Lillard because he's making a fortune. But they've got to go out there and get some sort of big name player on that team. And if you can get a big star in there to complement with Jimmy Butler, and if those other guys are going to contribute, and Tyler Hero is going to be back there next season, I think Tyler Hero was missed in a big way. I don't know if that would have necessarily taken Miami over the top in this NBA Finals. I think it would have made it a longer series, but you still got some good pieces. You've got a great coach down there, Eric Spoelstra, they've been as consistent as anybody in the NBA. I even go back as much to saying this century. You want to in 21st century.
Uh-huh.
So you have some pieces there in Miami, but I think if you're them, you've got to go out there and get a star player.
Yeah, definitely. Stars are what win you championships, and as great of a story as it was for them, like it would have been that much more impressive if they won, given what they had on their roster, in my honest opinion.
But I got to tell you though, this NBA postseason, which this NBA has had its fair share of problems this year, had one of the most dominant runs we've seen in history. I mean, the Nuggets were only the second team to post this kind of dominant run of 16 wins in 20 games. It was great. And then for Miami Heat to almost become the first 8 seed to win a championship, to see what they did to knocking off the top 2 teams in the Eastern Conference when nobody in their right mind gave them a chance was amazing, because you don't really see that in the NBA. You see it in hockey, you see it in the other sports, you see it in basketball. I mean, you see it in baseball, you see it in football. You can, but in basketball, you don't really see that because it usually comes down to the star players more than anything else. But Miami showed you that. They got in, they got great production from Butler, who's proved himself to be a star. He unfortunately he cooled off in the finals, and if that's the case, it's very hard for a Miami team to overcome that. And when Jokic is doing his thing, but nevertheless, a great year down there in Miami as well.
Oh, for sure.
So we'll find out.
No, I still think they're a team that's in good hands, regardless. The Heat.
Yeah, East is still though pretty deep, but I think they're going to be in good hands. And I'll tell you what, though, Hank, you enjoy this NBA. You look back at this run and you reflect on it, and before you know it, we get right into the off season, and we're only a little over a week away from the NBA draft. That'll be the next big thing we'll talk about, and we'll probably get a little bit more into that next week on the show. So that's what we've got as we put a capper on the 2022-2023 NBA season. But then we get into the off season. I know Paul over there at the 3&D, he's going to have a very busy a very busy show in the off season because he's got the draft, he's got the summer league. Obviously, we're going to be us, and of course, Empty the Bench. We're going to be paying very close attention to the ruling that comes down on John Morant. That is going to be a big deal. Find out what happens there. I know as a Knicks fan, this is going to be a very important offseason for the Knicks because, you're coming off of a very successful season, and now the expectation is going to be that, you got to build off of that. So you got an important offseason there for the Knicks. So we'll find out here. Offseason just getting started. It's already been a lot of movement with the coaches that have been happening in the NBA. So it's been busy times, and I'm sure we're not going to have much rest when it comes to the NBA this offseason. But let's stay on the winter sports, and let's transition over to the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, a full disclosure, folks, that we are recording the show before the start of Game 5 between the Panthers and the Golden Knights. So there's a very good possibility. There's a possibility that the Golden Knights could be hoisting the Stanley Cup already while this show is premiering. So we will do a reaction video to that. But I do want to talk about this series in general leading into Game 5, Hank, because this series to me has been all Golden Knights. And
oh yeah,
I think when you look at this, even the one game that the Panthers have won in this series so far, the Knights dominated that one, really.
Yeah, I was going to say the Panthers kind of stole that game. I think if it wasn't for Sergei Bobrovsky making a lot of big saves, I don't think the Panthers are even in a position to steal that game the way they did. And props to them for taking that game. And fun fact, this was actually their first ever win in a Stanley Cup Finals game. And thus, officially, it is the most successful season in Florida Panthers history. However, like you said, the Knights have been absolutely dominated. They're head and shoulders the better team. I talked about this before with you during the playoffs, but Johnny, I kept saying, watch out for Vegas. They have been a sneaky good team. And the reason I say sneaky good is because even though they're the team that had the most points in the Western Conference, all we kept hearing about was the powerhouse that was the Eastern Conference. And then when you just look at all the depth that they had, it really wasn't getting all that much attention. But when you have guys such as Jack Eichel, Chandler Stevenson, Jonathan Marchessault, to name a few, and then Mark Stone's been a key member of that team too. And of course, you have so many different goalies that you've had to kind of mix and match with during the season until Aiden Hill, a rookie, emerges out of nowhere to have a dominant Stanley Cup Finals run. That just tells you that this is a very fundamentally sound team, and they're very well coached too. Bruce Cassidy was an excellent hire, and I think they've definitely got lucky getting him when they did. And after for a team that's only been around for 6 years, Johnny, look at all they've accomplished. This is a team that you may remember made it to the finals in their very first year of existence. And fun fact, 6 players still remain from that team. One of them is the aforementioned Jonathan Marchessault, who, again, he's pretty much been the face of the franchise. And I think you can probably make the case that he is the greatest player in the short history of the Golden Knights. And
sure.
I don't think it's a stretch that I'm putting him on my Mount Rushmore for that team, although it may be a little bit too early to do so. But
gotta have a Mount Rushmore no matter for what situation, Hank. It's
I'm a sucker for those. And there may or may not be that idea of every MLB team having a Mount Rushmore. So stay tuned for that once a certain baseball show gets underway.
Absolutely, yeah. No, just to go off topic for 1 second, there's a friend I have on Facebook that does Mount Rushmores of everything. Almost does one daily. So you can do a Mount if he could do that, you could do a Mount Rushmore of a 6-year franchise. Absolutely.
But yeah, Jonathan Marchessault would definitely be up there for sure. And yeah, it's been a great ride. And they obviously had their ups and downs. They had that bad 3-1 collapse the year later when there was a controversial Game 7 that they lost to the San Jose Sharks. You had the bubble run where a lot of their players kept chirping and they ended up losing to the Dallas Stars. You had an even more shocking loss to a Montreal Canadiens team that probably wouldn't have even made the playoffs if it were a normal year. I'm talking, of course, about the 2021 run. And then you had the acquisition of Jack Eichel, and then so many injuries led to their first non-playoff season in franchise history, and now they're on the precipice of accomplishing a Stanley Cup Finals victory that they'd been pretty much knocking on the door for since the start of their existence, I guess you could say. But with that being said, I do want to tip my cap to the Florida Panthers because much like the Miami Heat, that is another team that had a really good ride to getting to the Stanley Cup Finals. Nobody in their right mind thought that they were gonna beat the Bruins. In fact, I think a lot of people thought they were gonna get swept. But give them credit after Game 5, and look how close they were to losing that game. They were literally a Brad Marchand breakaway from possibly getting sent home early. And forget that. Remember, they made the playoffs by 1 point. Think about how many bad decisions that Ron Hextall made for the Penguins, and imagine if one of them gets reversed. We're probably not even talking about the Florida Panthers at this time, but They came back against the Bruins, and then they got stronger afterwards. They almost swept out the Toronto Maple Leafs, and then they won a series against the Hurricanes that, for a 4-game sweep, was actually pretty close. But, playoff Bob made some incredible saves, and Matthew Tkachuk emerged as a true playoff hero. And look, even though they ultimately, barring any miracle, they're probably not going to come back and win the finals, you still have names like Bobrovsky and Tkachuk are probably going to be remembered by hockey fans of South Florida for years to come.
Sure is. Now, this is a topic that we've always discussed in situations like this. The Panthers, they had a long time to rest in between the conference finals and the Stanley Cup finals, and it was almost the roles were different in the NBA finals, but we're seeing it here in the rust might be playing a factor. But when I look at this series also, there's a couple of things. The goaltending from Vegas side, you look at Hill. Hill didn't even play in the first round, and he's got 10 wins this postseason. I mean, going into Game 5. I mean, that's kind of unheard of when you look at it. And
yeah, I was going to say that's even crazier than what Cam Ward did with the Hurricanes, because Cam Ward at least played in the first round, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Now, on the Panthers side, Tkachuk's not been the same since that Game 3 hit. You looked at Game 4; he played less than 17 minutes, and he was there for that almost tying goal in the fading seconds of Game 4. Which, if that went in, who knows what we're talking about here in terms of a series. But Hill was able to make a big stop there, and I think Vegas's defense also. You've seen it in this series too. The Panthers have really not been able to get into the middle of the ice. A lot of their shots, if you've been watching, have been corner shots on either side, while Vegas has been able to go almost like down the middle a lot of the times and been able to score. So, but Bobrovsky hasn't been the same as he was in the prior rounds, but at the same time, Vegas just is showing you that, they don't have a dominant player, which I think makes this run even more special. If you looked at their roster, I don't think anybody had more than like 70 points during the regular season. And usually when you see these teams, there's always that one player, but it's been a lot of great goaltending, a lot of shared scoring amongst the Knights, and the Knights also just continuing a trend that we've seen here in this postseason. The Vegas, they're 8-0 when they lead after one. The Panthers are 4-5 when they're trailing after one. So when you look at this series, and also Vegas loves to jump out fast. They've had 4 games in the Stanley Cup playoffs where they've scored within the first 2 minutes of those games, and they've won all 4 of them. So fast starts, that's sometimes hard to come, and you're just getting into the groove, and they tally one real quick and set the momentum. So that's hard to come back from, and you've seen that. So it's an amazing thing, and also a fun fact here: 47 wins by the road team in the Stanley Cup playoffs, which is tied with the 2012 playoffs for the most ever. So we'll see if that trend continues, but
that makes sense because that Cup Finals was won by a number 8 seed in the LA Kings, and incidentally, I think yesterday was actually the anniversary of when they won that, or a couple days ago was the anniversary of when they boat raced the Devils in Game 6, and thank goodness they did, because you thought I wasn't over this past series, and I'm still not over Henrique. It's over. Ugh.
Well, and it's weird, just to go off topic there, that Rangers don't have a coach yet. Well, you see all these other guys signing everywhere else.
It's looking like it's going to be Peter Laviolette, although I'm hearing a lot of rumors about Joel Quenneville, and
his name is still coming up a lot. Wow. Okay.
No, well, again, if it's been taking them this long, and Peter Laviolette's been in the process a lot of times, and you really put 2 and 2 together, then it would make sense for them to want to try and see if Joel Quenneville's available. That being said, I'm still not 100% sure I want that, because look, even though I know he's got that great track record, and I know he would be the coach with experience that probably could put this Rangers team over the top, I feel like his reputation with what happened in Chicago could be a problem. But that being said, do I think Laviolette is a bad choice? Absolutely not. I think Laviolette he also has the experience. Now, granted, he obviously doesn't have as many cups as Joel Quenneville does, and he didn't really create a dynasty in his stops, but he's arguably he is the most successful coach in Carolina Hurricanes history. He's the only coach that won the Cup Finals. He took the Flyers on some decent runs. He's the closest. No, I take that back. No, Keenan was the closest coach to winning a cup with the Flyers since 1975. But after Keenan, he did come pretty close in 2010. And he took the Predators, another 8-seeded team, to the finals in 2017. So he's been around the block, and I think he could be what the Rangers need. But again, we'll see what happens. I'm hoping this is a guy that does better with in-game adjustments, and I'm hoping he's not quite the players coach that Gallant was. Because look, as much as I love Gerard Gallant, the more I'm really looking at it and the more that I'm watching the videos, I can't say that letting him go was the wrong decision, especially after he kind of normalized the way they lost. Like, if you look at his post-game interviews, I think he definitely was. I'm not going to say he was the problem, but he was a problem for why they ended up losing, unfortunately.
Well, I think those reports that came out afterwards, how the players were not happy with him, I don't think was really, starting to really make sense. But we'll find out what happens there. That seems to be the one team that's still in the coaching search. They are. Calgary just got a new coach, so did Anaheim. Yeah, and I was bummed that Brunette, who's the guy that you were talking about, went to Nashville. He went there.
I'm not surprised he got hired so quickly because that's the guy.
He's a guy you were bringing up
the Panthers last year.
On the show before. But we'll see. And just to show you how difficult it is to come back from 3-1 down in the finals, teams are 36-1 when leading 3-1 in the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's a tall order. I know Florida's done this before, but to do it again, I think that's going to be a tough task. But we'll find out. But as of this recording, we don't even know if Kachuk's going to be playing in Game 5, and if he is, how effective he would be. So we'll find out what happens here. But nevertheless, another great Stanley Cup Finals, another great Stanley Cup postseason.
Actually, Johnny, do you want to know the only 3-1 comeback in the Stanley Cup Finals was actually the I think that was the Toronto Maple Leafs reverse sweep.
Wow. Okay.
When the Toronto Maple Leafs reverse swept the Detroit Red Wings in 1942.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I don't remember anything recent like that.
No, that was the first reverse sweep 62 years before a certain reverse sweep that we don't talk about.
Ironically, weren't the Rangers up 3-1 in 94, and then that went to Game 7?
Correct, and then they almost blew that one too because they were up 3-1 in the third period.
Yes.
Trevor Linden scored less than a minute into the third period, and then Nathan Lafayette on the Canucks had a shot that looked like it was going to go in, but it hit the post and
got swept away.
If that had gone in, I feel like the Rangers probably would have lost that game. They were literally inches away from choking that year.
And then the whole, icing bid in the last minute. I remember that. 94, I was only 3.5 when that happened, but that was the first year I remember watching sports in depth. And of course, I was so spoiled because what are the first two things that I'm watching? The Knicks in the NBA Finals and the Rangers in the Stanley Cup Finals. I mean, you start out with that. The first sporting events you watch is a 3.5-year-old. And it's like, how do you keep that going? I mean, you've had the Yankees of the 90s. The Knicks had a great 90s run. The Rangers had still some good success in the mid to late 90s. And then, unfortunately, they fell off into the lockout, which I know it's harsh to say this, but the lockout was the best thing that ever happened to them. But yeah, so I remember those moments. And, of course, I go back and watch it on YouTube a lot, too, especially since we're recording this or this show's premiering on the 29-year anniversary of the Rangers 94 Cup run. But we'll see what happens, and of course, we'll keep you updated. I know Jen and you will have some stuff if or when I should say the Rangers have their new head coach. Hank, you and Paul talked about this story last week, and I got to tell you, I was so bummed that I could not be here. One of the reasons why I couldn't do the show last week was the reception where I was awful. But I told you I would have gone out of my way if I could have to get on the air for this because the biggest thing that broke last week and is still developing even into this week is the whole merger between the PGA Tour, LIV Golf, and the DP League. But it's continuing to develop here, quite ironically, as we head towards the U.S. Open this weekend. So, latest coming out from the Wall Street Journal is that the PGA Tour, the commissioner, says that it couldn't afford to keep battling Saudi Arabia, and then we've even had politics get involved in this, and that's senators are asking LIV Golf and the PGA Tour leaders for records on the merger. Now, we've heard Jay Monahan, the commissioner, say that Congress left the PGA Tour on, quote unquote, on our own. You might have even brought this up last week too. One of the big reasons why I think we have finally reached this threshold, or whatever you want to say, is the win by Koepka weeks ago. I think that I think you were dead on with that, and that's what I was going to say. Once you had a LIV golfer win a major on the PGA Tour, then something was going to happen. And that's exactly the case. And it's quite ironic, Hank, that we head into this weekend at the U.S. Open, and Rory Mcllory, who's been a very critical, very outspoken about LIV Golf, and Brooks Koepka are going to be in the same group teeing off on Thursday. This weekend, if there's any reason to watch golf, it's going to be for that, to see where this goes, because I think McIlroy is not going to hold back. He's been very vocal about this from the get-go. But Hank, I mean, that's why I think we are where we are today and heading into a major this weekend.
Yeah, I also think a big reason why we are where we are is because I'm going to use another term that I used with Nick when I made my little cameo. I don't know if I'd call it a cameo. I was there for the whole episode, but
oh yeah,
it had been a while since I'd been on Empty the Bench. So shout out, Nick, and once again, thank you for bringing me on to your show. I had a lot of fun cracking myself up, probably no less than 7 times, but I'm going to repeat this term again. A deal with the devil. That's exactly what it was. Jay Monahan must have been thinking, oh, I can merge because we can make a lot of money. But then ultimately, at the end of the day, what he didn't do was consult his own guys. And Rory was the one who was outspoken saying, I hope LIV just dies and goes away, correct?
He's been very outspoken about them from the get-go, yes.
And yeah, there was a lot of outrage, especially because this guy made a certain lovely comment about comparing that involved 9/11 too. Like, can I just, Johnny, I have a little bit of a hot take for you.
Oh,
I know we love to shit on Rob Manfred, and deservedly so. We shit on Adam Silver for his slip-ups. Again, deservedly so. But I'm sorry, this has to be said. Jay Monahan is the east end of a westbound horse. Probably more so than Manfred, because say what you want about Rob Manfred, he wouldn't make a deal like this and associate himself with a company that is pretty much bad. This guy literally goes out of his way, criticizes people's ethics and morals, and he backs out on it without telling his players over money. Yeah. Like, are you kidding me?
That was one of the first things that broke about this story last week.
He is a big time major league horse's ass. There, I said it.
I think that's going to TikTok. Stay tuned for that. But
hey,
this is something even bigger than sports. So yeah, you have to say what Monahan did is
and I'm not saying that Silver and Manfred don't have the east end of westbound horse, but
they're destroyed. But see, it's totally different because those two guys are destroying their own sport. This is something that goes above sports, even with when you have the 9/11 fund or the alliance, having to make statements about this. I mean, we're talking about when about a national tragedy versus, the destroying of your own sports. I mean, this is something totally, totally different. So, yeah, I mean, we might have to have another graphic just for Monahan, but I don't even want to think about it because he probably doesn't even deserve his own graphic because he's been so bad.
Jay Monahan misread. Wow. I think misread might
Jay Monahan misread. All right, that we'll use that for now. I'll have to see if we can come up with that, with if there's anything better, but it's good. It's good alliteration. So we'll
Jay
ride
Monahan
with that.
misread. I think you're being too kind.
Yeah, well, we got to start somewhere. We always adjust, but it'll be fine. But just going back to this Wall Street Journal report, Monahan told employees that the tour had already spent $50 million in legal fees and had dipped into its reserves for $100 million to help pay increased purses in elevated events and other bonuses to players. There's so many things about this that, and I mean, you and Nick had talked about this too and Empty the Bench last week. I think everybody's spot on. I think you and Paul also said this last week. Yeah, and again, this even goes above sports, so that's why this is such a major thing. But it really just all goes back to last week. This really, came to be after Koepka won a major. And now, with the U.S. Open happening this weekend, I'll bet you right now that there's going to be a lot of fallout and more, drama happening this weekend at the U.S. Open. If there's ever a reason to watch it, it's to see if anything else comes out about this.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
So, and then also, as I said, Monahan said that Congress left PGA Tour, quote, on our own. That's not really a surprise there. I just can't wait to see, McIlroy and Koepka, who are the two of the central players in the bitter 2-year dispute between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf, teeing off together at the 123rd Open in Los Angeles. So by the way, they will tee off along with 2021 Masters champion Hideki Matsuyama for the first 2 rounds. They tee off at 4:54 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. I'll tell you right now, I will be tuned into that. I cannot wait to see what happens because this is the first major since this bombshell happened. And there will be more to this, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, big deal out of all this happening right now. Well, Hank, as the winter sports wrapped up, we've still got golf, we've got tennis coming up here in just a few minutes, but now we start turning our attention to the National Football League. And yes, teams are just in training camps and stuff, and mini camps, but we've got a couple of interesting storylines to discuss. Late last week, some news with the Carolina Panthers, who are going to be one of my teams to watch going into next season, not only just because I live down here in South Carolina, even though they play up in North Carolina, but Bryce Young, who it looks like is going to be elevated to quarterback 1 for the Panthers. So Frank Reich, their new head coach, said last Thursday that it looks like it's trending towards Bryce Young being the starter week 1 there for Carolina. Now, this is a very big deal. Now, you do have a very good veteran backup there in Andy Dalton, but this is a big deal for Carolina. And I said this is a big year for the Panthers because if you look at that NFC South, which is still pretty crappy, I would say, if Bryce Young steps in and he does the job, I think he's taking Carolina to winning this NFC South next year. I really do. And even though I'm saying that with Derek Carr going to the Saints, I'm still not really sold on New Orleans. I think the Bucs are nowhere going to be the same now with Baker Mayfield, although it's a great shot for Baker to prove all the doubters wrong. And the Falcons, while they had a very good year, I don't know a full year Desmond Ridder, what happens with them. But I think when you look at the offseason that the Panthers have had, which I think they've had one of the top 3 offseasons in football with all the moves that they made, bringing in Adam Thielen, bringing in Hayden Hurst, Miles Sanders, amongst many other options, their draft choices, drafting Bryce Young, who I think in the right system with Frank Reich could work. It's a big deal for the Panthers.
I don't disagree. I don't think that's actually a stretch at all. The NFC South really is up for grabs. And I'm going to go back to what I said beforehand. I still can't for the life of me understand how the Chicago Bears won that trade. Number one, they really didn't get enough in in return for that number 1 pick. And number 2, I think Carolina took one of the better quarterbacks available in Bryce Young. Now, granted, we don't know what he's really going to be like, and I don't think we can fully judge him after year 1 because he'll probably have certain moments where he has his, growing pains. But again, based on the division, yeah, I'm not the Falcons. Forget about them. You know that team is a joke. I'm sorry to say. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are defensively, they're all right, so that might win them some games. But I've said for a while that I think Baker Mayfield is mid. And as far as the Saints go, they're way over the cap. I'm not sold on them either. I think the Panthers are definitely in good shape. And yeah, I won't hear any argument about who won that trade. It was the Panthers, hands down.
I think the Saints are the wild card, though. They're in that NFC South.
I know they may have lost DJ Moore, by the way, but you can replace somebody. DJ Moore is a replaceable.
Well, think about it, though. You lose DJ Moore, but you brought in Adam Thielen from Minnesota. I mean, you brought in Hayden Hurst, who's a very good tight end, and Miles Sanders, who's a very capable running back. We saw what he did there in Philadelphia, too. So, I mean, they've got options there, and they did a lot with less last year. If you remember, they were about 6-7 weeks in, arguably the worst team in the league, and then they ended up playing relevant football to week 17 last year. And now Frank Reich, who I know people have mixed emotions on Frank Reich, I think he's good. I think he's actually going to do it right. I think he's got a good system. But to me, the wild card in that division, Hank, are the Saints because Derek Carr is all right. They do have Alvin Kamara for now, at least. Chris Olave is a decent wide receiver. So, Michael Thomas, can he stay on the field? That's going to be the most important thing. And we'll find out. I mean, you could see the Bucs. Maybe Baker Mayfield does the middle finger tour this year, and maybe right. I mean, maybe he does that because every now and then he'll run into something. And the Falcons, say what you want. I mean, Arthur Smith could have. I mean, he took a crappy team last year and actually did all right with them. I mean, I made the point that I thought you could have even made the case he could have been a top 3 coach of the year last year with what they had down there in Atlanta. So I still don't think the division's that great. I mean, it's going to be somewhat competitive, but I think if everything goes right for Carolina here, that I think they do have a chance to win this division next year. So Bryce Young now and being elevated to the number 1 quarterback spot, going to be a very cool thing to see there up in Carolina. We were just talking about the Vikings with losing Adam Thielen. Well, they also released Dalvin Cook after 4 straight Pro Bowl seasons. Now, the Vikings did make one more effort to trade Cook, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter last Thursday before his release. Now, Dalvin could sign with any team after 4:01 p.m. Eastern on Friday, and he's going to turn 28 in August. The one team that's being reported about from Schefter and other sources are the Miami Dolphins for Cook, which I think is again another interesting, and I like the idea. Now, the Dolphins do have options at running back. We saw that with Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Myles Gaskin, amongst others. So then you bring in Dalvin Cook to go along there with Tua, and the receiving options that they have there, like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. I like that move also if the Dolphins do it. But Hank, what I also think about too is we know the Vikings easily won the NFC North last year, but they seemed like they were a very flawed team, and I think the Giants showed that in the playoff game last year. But now you lose Thielen, you lose Dalvin Cook, you've got some players that are holding out right now there in Minnesota. And I know you weren't high on the Lions, what they did in the draft, but I'll tell you what, I think this is opening a door for the Lions to make it a little bit of a closer division than you originally had thought. And now we know Green Bay is not going to be that great with Rodgers being gone. The Bears maybe take a step forward, another year of Justin Fields, and they do have some receiving options and some offensive line help. But I think this does open the door a little bit more, not going to say fully, but a little bit more for the Lions in that NFC North, despite the fact that you still have arguably the best connection in football, Kirk Cousins to Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, I still think Minnesota ends up coming out on top with that division. However, if I'm being honest, it's going to feel more like they're winning it by default. And I think the Packers maybe could have done all right, but I didn't think their draft was great as well. Actually, if I'm being honest with you, I don't think any of the teams in the NFC North had a good draft, but that's just my honest opinion. I think the Vikings they're going to be okay because at the end of the day, running backs are not a position that you really rely on in this day and age in the NFL. And, as long as you still have Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson, that will help. But at the end of the day, if Kirk Cousins, and listen, as much as I love this Giants squad, Kirk Cousins not losing that game or the Vikings losing that game to the Giants says a lot about them. Does it not?
Yes. I wasn't high on the Vikings at all last year. They were
they were frauds.
Well, remember, they were struggling to get out of the hole last year.
Actually, no, Johnny, let me take this step further. You ever get this alert on your phone that says fraud alert? It may have been the Vikings.
Well, yes and no. I think yes and no with the Vikings, but that's a division, maybe 9 or 10, maybe 9 wins gets it done too, because maybe they take a step down and other teams take a step up. Maybe we'll see. But speaking of running backs, Hank, got to talk about our New York Giants because Saquon Barkley came out and said that he's unsure if a new deal is going to get done with the Giants. And at his AMPT football camp last week, he was optimistic about getting a long-term. He was asked how optimistic he was, and he was hesitant. And he was not ecstatic with how the negotiations have gone. It's basically saying pretty much, I don't know. Now, remember, the Giants did franchise tag him earlier this offseason. The two sides have until July 17th to agree on a new deal. So we got a month before, this ultimately comes down. But if they're unable to find a middle ground, he has come out and said that he will at least contemplate sitting out for the season. Now, that being said, who needs who more? Does Saquon need the Giants more, or the Giants need Saquon more?
I would say Saquon needs the Giants more.
I agree.
That's why I'm glad that they took the running back in the 5th round.
Yeah.
And having looked at film of him, I actually think he could be a pretty solid replacement for Saquon at a much better value too.
I mean, we not knocking him, but in the years that he's been hurt, 2 seasons ago, Devontae Booker was the Giants' best running back. And they couldn't bring him back because of the salary cap hell that they were in. But, you can get running backs off the heap. I've said that if I'm the Giants, if he doesn't want to come back, he wants to sit out, I'm calling about Zeke, and I'm bringing him in on, 1 year, $5 million deal, and I can get at least enough production out of him to be successful. So I agree with you. I think it's more of a fact that Saquon needs the Giants. Now, according to ESPN, the Giants did offer Barkley a deal that could have been worth close to $14 million per season, and Barkley and his team turned it down. It's the nature of the position, Hank. We've spoken about this ad nauseum on this show about the running back position, and it's very hard for that position to hold up year over year. I think one of the perfect examples of that last year was with the Indianapolis Colts and Jonathan Taylor. He had been dealing with nagging ankle issues, and that slowed his production down from his first year. And
raise your hand if you picked me first in your fantasy draft last year.
Oh, I knew there always has to be a fantasy angle somewhere along the lines here, right? But I don't know where this goes. I think it's tough to say because really, if Saquon does hold out, I think he's hurting his value more than anything because, again, it's the running back position. This is not about the receiving side. It's not a tight end. It's not a quarterback, which those positions are extremely important and valued a ton. I think Saquon's only hurting his value if he's sitting out. And if I'm the Giants, again, I can go out there and I can get a veteran running back. I can bring one up off the practice squad. We've spoken about this ad nauseum too. When the Giants were in London and played the Packers, some of their best runs and their most important runs in that game were from guys like Bridewell and Breida. So I can go out there and get them. Am I going to get like 10 yards a carry like Saquon has a potential to? No. But do I need 10 yards per carry from these guys? No, I don't need that either. I just need just enough to be productive. And the Giants do have a good complement of receiving options. I love the Jalen Hyatt draft spot from Tennessee, that receiver. I think he's going to do very, very well. Another under-the-radar kind of pickup from Brian Daboll and the Giants. So I think Saquon's only hurting himself more than the Giants are hurting from him. I really think that, this is going to backfire in his eyes. I see where he's coming up, but he's also, if you looked at his career, he's had 2, maybe 3 healthy seasons. And he's entering, his 6th or 7th year now? You have to think about that, Hank.
Yeah, honestly, like I said, I love Saquon Barkley, but if the Giants don't end up are careful, I wouldn't lose any sleep over letting him go, even though I love the guy. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, you just, a running back is not going to help as much. I've been on record many a time saying that Daniel Jones is the guy that I felt was more of a priority to keep, and thank God we got him re-signed, by the way.
The way the Giants have gone about this offseason, I think has been.
And I'm sorry, but for those people who are telling me that the Giants were crazy to do what they did with Daniel Jones, I got your receipts right here. Just letting you know. And I told you that so many other quarterbacks were going to get paid a shit ton more money than Daniel Jones. Joe Shane's a fucking genius.
Look, Daniel Jones works in the Giants system, so you can't put a value on that.
Exactly. Yes.
And it's really, and you brought this up, it's really only for 2 seasons. It's not a long-term deal like we've seen with Lamar, with Jalen Hurts, where we're going to see down the road with Burrow and Herbert. It's really only a 2-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I think it comes down to. I think the Giants have had a very, very smart offseason, and it's amazing when you have a great GM and a great head coach what you can do. And the Giants turned that around, ended up 9-7-1 last season, beat the Vikings when nobody in their right mind gave them a chance. And now we'll see if they can build off of that in the division where, the Eagles are still going to be great. The Cowboys don't know what to make of them. And Washington, I'm not sold on them really. So really, I know the Giants have a very challenging schedule going into next season, but I trust what they're doing. I think they've had a very, very smart offseason. I saw while we were recording here, Stephon Diggs is holding out, which already McDermott has said there that he's concerned about that. Sometimes these things get a little bit blown out of proportion, but, you need some football topics to talk about. So that's happened. Also, one other interesting note that broke this past week on the NFL side, your Jacksonville Jaguars, Hank, may have to be playing home games. Yes, your Jaguars. They may have to be playing home games somewhere else during their proposed renovations to TIAA Bank Field. And one of those options could be Daytona International Speedway.
That's going to look extremely weird having a football field there, no?
Yeah, I don't know what other options. Other sites mentioned would be an 11,000-seat baseball stadium that houses the AAA affiliate of the Miami Marlins, a 9,400-seat stadium at the University of North Florida. But they said also that would cost $125 million to add 20,000 seats to either facility to get them NFL ready. Mm-hmm. Now, we're looking here. The Jaguars' lease with the city expires at the 2029 season. The team is hoping to reach a deal with the city in March 2024 and present it at the NFL spring meetings for approval. But why this is because it's a $2 billion project that they need for stadium improvements where they play right now. Now, just to put that in perspective, you're talking about an 11,000-seat stadium and a 9,400-seat stadium adding 20,000 seats. Right now, they're playing at a facility that is at 30,000 plus. Oh, that's actually where if they were going to Daytona, that's what it would be. But I mean, a 30,000 seat stadium, almost, it's like what the Chargers did before they went to SoFi. But yeah, that'd be some, unfortunate home field advantage. But that's something to keep an eye on while there are renovations happening there in Jacksonville, that they could be playing at Daytona. I'm trying to see if we can come up with some jokes about car racing while talking about the Jaguars. But just something to keep in mind there too, that the how about we talk about the London Jaguars, and remember the Jaguars are playing 2 games.
The Daytona Jaguars.
The Daytona Jaguars sounds
actually that is a good ring to it, because Jaguar is a type of car and Daytona Speedway.
Hey, right? Never know. I mean, it sounds better than London Jaguars, although despite the fact.
Let's wake up, have some tea and crumpets, and watch the London Jaguars.
Well, and next season they are playing consecutive weeks in London. One is a home team.
Oh, top of the morning.
One is a road one. Well, there's always been that talk about an NFL team maybe being overseas or being, in another country.
Oh, so we get to see Trevor Lawrence back-to-back weeks, eh?
Hey, I like those 9:30 a.m. Eastern start times, but
for you lovely Americans, have some breakfast while watching some football.
By the way, one of our comments: running as fast as a Jaguar. That's not
sorry.
bad.
I could not resist doing my British accent.
That's quite all right. Absolutely, we love them.
You're gonna. By the way, fair warning, you're going to hear that British accent probably a little bit more often. I'm surprised I never broke that out a lot last year when talking football with you.
Hey, you know what? We're going to have plenty of international games next season when we do our football picks. So build it up, get it ready. We will definitely do that. Remember, and our graphics, also when they're playing 2 games in Frankfurt next season, we'll have our upset special graphics. I'm going to be keeping Nick and everybody at ETB very busy when August and September starts up. So we'll see what happens. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's get to a couple of the topics here before we get out of here. We were talking earlier about some tennis. Well, Novak Djokovic, you were talking about Jokic. Now we're talking about Djokovic. Recorded his 23rd career Grand Slam men's singles title after winning the French Open. Now, of course, the debate about this now is he owns the most Grand Slam titles. Is he the greatest of all time after passing Roger Federer? And I'll tell you what. So, they played at different times. And here's what I would say. If you're looking purely about numbers, Hank, then Djokovic earns that, because in addition to the majors counts, he's spent a record number of weeks at number 1 in the rankings. He's won each of the Masters 1,000 events twice. But the thing I would look at, too, is breaking down those 23 Grand Slam titles. He's won 10 Australian Opens, 3 French Opens, 7 times at Wimbledon, and the U.S. Open 3 times. Now, the one knock that Roger Federer had was he was never a good clay court person. So Djokovic has shown that he could win on all surfaces, even though he hasn't won the French Open as many times, but that's hard to do. I mean, we know Rafael Nadal is the guy, but even looks like he's starting to break down a little bit too. And Djokovic has dealt with some injuries. We know Federer dealt with some injuries too. But to me, I think Djokovic actually is the GOAT because of not only the numbers, but how he plays, and also the surfaces that he's won these majors on. He's won a few extra French Opens, so he knows how to play on clay. And sometimes if you play all different kinds of surfaces in an outdoor sport, I think that actually does, contribute to your greatness. So to me, Novak Djokovic is the greatest of all time, not only based on numbers, but because of the number, not only the number of titles, but also the surfaces that he's won those titles on.
Yeah. Oh man. Now you see why I had my little Hank Indictor slip up, even though thankfully I am nowhere near and as high of a position as Adam Silver when talking about Nikola Jokic, because turns out there's another Serbian making history. And hey, if you're from Serbia, I mean, Good for you. And you're celebrating these guys. Enjoy every minute. 23 Grand Slams. I believe that's more than Feds, and that's more than Rafa. No,
Right. It is. And Nadal, if you've been following him, Nadal's been dealing with a couple of injuries here these last couple of years. It's been taking him out of events, so he has not really played that many over the last couple of years. We know Federer's now retired. We've spoken about that here on Game On too, and now Djokovic overtaking that. I mean, it's hard to do because tennis careers are not as long as people think they are. So,
right.
Yeah, it's definitely been a heck of a run here for Djokovic, and I think because of the variety of these majors, I think that is what makes him the greatest. Because, I said, not knocking Federer, but his biggest weakness was clay. That was really Nadal's specialty was clay, and some of the other surfaces he wasn't that great on. But Djokovic's variety, I think, is what does take him over the top in this debate. Not to make a knock on anybody else, but if we're talking about the greatest of all time, to me, it's Djokovic.
Oh yeah,
so
can't really argue with that.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to roll with there. And then finally, I'd be remiss if I don't bring up the Belmont Stakes because I grew up and lived the first 25 years of my life 5 minutes away from Belmont Park. And until the Islanders moved across the street at UBS Arena, this was always the one day a year that my hometown of Elmont, New York would be put on the map. The other 364 days or 365 days on leap years a year, when you tell people you live in Elmont, people look at you and say, where the hell is that? And then you just say Belmont Park. And they said, oh, that's where you live. Okay, yes. So, obviously the sport of horse racing is going through a lot right now. And unfortunately it continued, and we're going to get to that in just a second here. And the Belmont almost didn't even happen this year because if you've been following the news in the past week or so, those wildfires that are happening in Canada, the air quality has been sending that wildfire smoke down into the northeast, into the New York area. We were actually experiencing a little bit down here, a little bit of haze here in South Carolina even. But, some of those images that I saw of the city and even the reports of what's happening at the tri-state airports, LaGuardia, Newark, and JFK. I mean, there was like a ground stop. There were flights that weren't even going in and out because of the poor visibility there. But fortunately, the air quality had gotten better for the weekend. Belmont didn't even race last Thursday, so that's why there was discussion even from New York Governor Kathy Hochul that this race may not even happen. But it did go off, and Arcangelo won the 155th Belmont. And the special thing about this and the historical angle to this is Jena Antonucci became the first female trainer to win a Triple Crown race, which is a very, very special thing. Now, it's very rare because there's not many that announce it. In fact, I'm just trying to see here. I think there are not many female trainers in general. I mean, usually we know about, the big guys like the Todd Pletchers and the Bob Bafferts of the world. But Antonucci, the 47-year-old first female trainer to win a Triple Crown race with Arcangelo, which really that horse's name was not really brought up a lot in the discussion leading up to the event, but a history-making moment in front of a very big crowd there at Belmont. Usually when there's no Triple Crown potential, those crowds are not as big, but you factor in that, there was no Triple Crown, you just coming off the air quality issues there, and you had a very good-sized crowd here. So a very special moment, and a moment that I think horse racing needed. They needed a good moment, and this was a very special and historical moment there, Hank.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm definitely happy for her, first female trainer to win a Triple Crown race. And it's nice to see a little bit of positive news in this sport after all the crazy death stuff we've been hearing about. Although, who knows what's been the real contribution to all of that.
Yeah, it's hard to say because after the Belmont and you're feeling very cool about this moment. Unfortunately, there was more tragic news in the horse racing world because in the final race on the card Saturday at Belmont, we had another catastrophic injury to a horse, and Escurgenes had to be euthanized, and it was the third horse that suffered a fatal injury at the current meet there at Belmont, and then we had another one that happened on Sunday. So we had two more horses, and it's just what's really sad about this also is every Triple Crown race was marred by a horse's deaths. We had the 12 following the Derby. We had one on Preakness Day. We remember with Bob Baffert, who had a horse that won the Preakness, but also had lost the horse a couple of races prior to a race. And then we've had two more following the Belmont. Now, the thing is, so already there was a discussion about, was this due to the air quality? But the way that the unfortunate deaths of these two horses happened on Saturday night and Sunday, I can't say that because it happened in the race. So does it have to do with training? I don't think with the Preakness and the Belmont you could say it's track condition, because it's only, and I say only, you only had one instance there at Pimlico and now two here at Belmont. See, I think there was a track condition at Churchill, because when you have 12 that die in a short amount of time at Churchill, that to me has to be track condition. And it took until the 12th death there at Churchill Downs to actually make a statement. And we found out, Hank, and this happened while I was off, that they ended up moving their meet in the time being to Ellis Park, which is a neighboring track there in Kentucky. So they did suspend racing at Churchill Downs, which I think was smart. I think it was too late, but they ended up doing the right thing, albeit too late. But unfortunately, you almost have to now wonder, is the training that are going into these horses, that now we're talking about three major events marred by tragic instances.
Jeez. That is pretty scary.
Yeah, and we're talking about a sport that's already been marred by doping allegations and now euthanizations, and this is not helping the cause. So, the next major event that happens, well, we have the Breeders' Cup in the fall, but in New York, I know the next big race there is the Travers up in Saratoga. Shout out to one of my brothers, Chris, and my sister-in-law, Rachel, who live up there, who will be coming down here, seeing them soon. I know they live right by there, so I went up there once in the summertime during the meet. It's the atmosphere up at Saratoga is electric, but obviously much different feeling now with all of this, and there's going to have to be an open investigation into this. I know Churchill Downs finally decided to suspend racing, and they moved the racing over to the neighboring track there in Ellis Park, but now you almost want to see, I think, and again, I'm just going off of a guess here. I'm not going to assume anything, but I think Churchill was a track condition. I think that the Pimlico and the Belmont situations were both training. Unless you were to tell me that 6 horses died at Belmont in the same day, then I can go off the track. But the Churchill thing is because it happened so much so quickly, and the Preakness and the Belmont, it wasn't that many. I think that's what you have to go with. So it's obviously a story that we will keep paying attention to. But as exciting as it was to see a history-making event there at the Belmont, unfortunately, it's being marred by tragedy again in the horse racing world, which is the last thing that sport needed. But unfortunately, that's a sad way to end the show. But that's how we're going to end the show here today. But Hank, on a much lighter note, we've got a lot coming up, not only here on Game On, but on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, because I know you've got a new show, or a show that's coming back real soon, which we'll get into a lot closer as we debut that. But we've got so many other projects working here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. I'm not trying to rush the summer away, but I'm really looking forward to getting my Monty moments back for college football and the NFL, and we will get those probably back in late August. So the best thing to do, folks, is to follow us across our social media platforms at Facebook and Twitter at Game On ETB, Instagram, GameOn_ETB. I will also keep you personally updated on my personal handle there at Montalbano and Y. Of course, Hank there at Ranger Hanky 96. And you can also check us out on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ETB Network, where if you like today's episode, leave us a like. If you're new, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Of course, have your notifications set so you know when all of our episodes are going to come out, not only here at Game On, but Empty the Bench. Of course, also Empty the Bench, Fruity Cereal, 3&D, and all of our shows, the MMA Outsiders, and so many more that are up and coming here as well. And you can also check us out, and I forgot to mention this at the start of the episode, but you can also check us out on your favorite audio podcast platform on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, and wherever you get your favorite podcast. You can check us out there for the audio versions of the show. And you can also check us out at etbpodcast.com for great blogging content from Jen, from Hank, and of course that blog about Pat Sajak, which I will definitely help out with as well, coming out really, really soon. So, Hank, that was a little bit of everything over the course of the show.
Yeah, for a little over an hour, we sure covered a good amount of stuff.
Well, that's what happens in mid to late June. Good to be back on with you today. You enjoy the rest of your week. I know you're going to the Subway Series game, so enjoy that. Of course, that's the reality of baseball, Hank. You know, middle of June, and we didn't even touch on baseball. Very scary. No, nice one. I would love to go back to those days again, but you know, we'll see. Time will tell on that. But you enjoy that. Good to be back on with you again today, and we'll do it again next week, and so much more. So, folks, for Hank Indictor, I'm Johnny Montalbano. Everybody enjoy your week. We'll catch you again next week.